How does one of the most powerful men in hip-hop, a mogul who built an empire of music, fashion, and influence, end up in a federal courtroom facing charges that threaten to erase his legacy? Why would someone with unimaginable wealth and access risk everything by becoming entangled in the shadowy world of trafficking and exploitation? What secrets were hidden behind the glitz of celebrity parties, the luxury mansions, and the flashing lights of fame? Was this a man orchestrating a dark double life, or simply a larger-than-life figure caught in the relentless crosshairs of federal investigators determined to make an example out of him? In 2025, Sean "Diddy" Combs was convicted on 2 federal felony counts for transporting women across state lines for prostitution under the Mann Act, a law often used to target powerful figures accused of exploiting women. But here's where the story twists. He was acquitted on several other charges, leaving the public with even more questions than answers. Did the acquittals mean there wasn't enough evidence, or did they point to the influence of a man who has always managed to stay one step ahead of scandal? Who were the women involved, and how much did they truly reveal behind closed doors in court? Was this case about justice or about power? And perhaps the most haunting question of all, is this conviction the final chapter in the Diddy saga, or just the beginning of even darker revelations yet to surface? Let's find out. The courtroom is silent. The air feels heavy, like the entire world is holding its breath. The man who once commanded stages, who once lit up music videos with champagne and diamonds, now sits at the defendant's table, silent, eyes fixed forward, jaw clenched. Sean "Diddy" Combs, producer, mogul, billionaire, icon, and now a convicted felon. The judge's voice cuts through the silence. On the charge of transporting women across state lines for prostitution, in violation of the Mann Act, guilty. A gasp ripples through the gallery. Some faces are shocked. Some nod knowingly. Others cry silently. For the first time in decades, the man who seemed untouchable has been branded guilty. But even in this moment of downfall, there is confusion. He is acquitted on several other charges. To some, this feels like justice. To others, mercy. To many, a mystery. And as the gavel falls, one question lingers above all others. How did we get here? Sean Combs' story is not just the story of one man. It is the story of an empire. An empire built on music, money, and influence, but also on silence, fear, and whispers of exploitation. And to understand the courtroom in 2025, we must go back to Harlem, back to the very beginning. Sean John Combs was born in Harlem in 1969. His father, Melvin, was a man connected to the drug trade, a dangerous world that ended in tragedy when Sean was just 2 years old. His father was shot and killed. Raised by his mother, Janice, Sean grew up in Mount Vernon, New York. They had little, but Janice worked tirelessly as a model and teacher's assistant to give him opportunity. Young Sean was ambitious, restless, always in motion. In the streets, he learned survival. At home, he learned determination. And in his heart, he nurtured a hunger, not just to succeed, but to dominate. By the time he entered Howard University in Washington, D.C., Sean had already made a name as a hustler, throwing parties, promoting events, and pulling in crowds with his charisma. But college wasn't his destiny. He dropped out, chasing something bigger. An internship at Uptown Records opened the door. Sean had vision. He had energy. And he had no fear of pushing boundaries. Soon, he was producing, scouting talent, and climbing the ranks of the music industry. In 1993, after being fired from Uptown, Sean made his boldest move yet. He created Bad Boy Entertainment. It was more than a label. It was a movement, a lifestyle, a brand that would change hip-hop forever. And at the center of it all was a young rapper from Brooklyn, Christopher Wallace, better known as the Notorious B.I.G. Together. They would redefine the sound of a generation. Through Bad Boy, Sean Combs became more than a producer. He became an icon. Albums went multi-platinum. Hits dominated the charts. His image, flashy suits, champagne, diamonds, and endless energy defined hip-hop's golden age. But even as the world celebrated his rise, Shadows were forming, whispers of arrogance, allegations of ruthless ambition, and the first signs that behind the glittering empire was a man who would do anything to win. From Harlem's cracked sidewalks to the neon glow of Manhattan, Sean Combs had built an empire. But power has a price, and soon, the first cracks in the empire would begin to show. Because in 1999, a single night in a New York City nightclub would change everything. It was December 27th, 1999, New York City. The millennium was days away. The whole world was buzzing with anticipation for the year 2000. And at Club New York, a flashy midtown nightclub packed wall to wall with celebrities, music executives, and fans, Sean Combs was at the center of it all. But sometime after 2 a.m., the party turned violent. A heated argument broke out. Tempers flared. Shots rang out inside the club. Chaos erupted. 3 people were injured. In seconds, what had been a glamorous night became a crime scene. And in the middle of the storm, Sean Combs, Jennifer Lopez, and his entourage. Police swarmed the scene. Witnesses pointed fingers. Soon after, Sean Combs, Jennifer Lopez, and his bodyguard Jamal Shine Barrow were taken into custody. The story dominated headlines instantly. The hip-hop mogul and his pop superstar girlfriend, arrested after a nightclub shooting. The media frenzy was unstoppable. What followed was one of the most sensational celebrity trials of the early 2000s. Prosecutors accused Combs of illegally possessing a weapon and of attempting to bribe a driver to take the fall. His defense, that he was a victim of circumstance, that he had no part in the violence that erupted that night. Jennifer Lopez distanced herself, eventually walking away from the relationship. Shine, young and loyal, faced his own charges and would ultimately take the fall. But for Sean Combs, the stakes were clear. Conviction could end his career. Acquittal could cement his image as untouchable. In 2001, after a highly publicized trial, Sean Combs was acquitted of all serious charges. He walked out of the courthouse a free man. Outside, supporters cheered. He smiled. He raised his hand in victory. To many, it felt like proof of his power. Proof that Sean Combs was, once again, untouchable. But not everyone saw it that way. To critics, it was a sign of privilege, influence, and wealth shielding him from consequences. The streets whispered. The media speculated. Was justice truly served, or was this another example of a powerful man escaping accountability? The trial left scars. Jennifer Lopez was gone. Shine was sentenced to 10 years in prison. And Sean Combs, though acquitted, now carried a new reputation. To fans, he was a survivor. To critics, he was a manipulator who used money and power to escape punishment. And yet, his empire only grew. He reinvented himself as P. Diddy, launched new ventures, and seemed to thrive in the spotlight once again. But beneath the surface, the nightclub shooting had changed everything. The cracks in the empire had begun to show. Sean Combs had survived his first real brush with destruction. He walked away free, his empire intact. But the whispers didn't stop. Lawsuits, rumors, allegations. Everywhere he went, shadows followed. And as the new millennium began, the stakes would only grow higher. Because power can protect a man, but it can also paint a target on his back. And for Sean Combs, the 2000s would bring more fame, more fortune, and far more dangerous secrets. The year 2001 marked a turning point. Sean Combs emerged from the nightclub, trial not defeated, but reborn. The world no longer called him Puff Daddy. He was now P. Diddy. A new name, a new brand, a symbol of survival. With his freedom intact, Diddy doubled down on empire building. He expanded Bad Boy Records, launched Sean John clothing into a global brand, secured fragrance deals, and ventured into television. He wasn't just a rapper or producer anymore. He was becoming an empire unto himself, the face of hip-hop wealth and ambition. On the surface, he lived the dream. High-profile relationships with Hollywood stars and models. Lavish parties at his mansions in New York, Miami, and Los Angeles. Magazine covers that hailed him as hip-hop's first true mogul. To the public, Diddy embodied power, style, and success. But behind the flash, cracks were forming. Civil lawsuits began to surface. Employees alleged mistreatment. Nightclub altercations led to complaints. Women came forward with accusations of abuse and coercion. Most cases were quietly settled, sealed with confidentiality agreements and checks signed by Combs' lawyers. Each time, the machine kept moving. This was the pattern. A whisper, a headline, a lawsuit, and then silence. To some, it was proof of innocence. To others, proof of influence. Diddy's empire had its own gravity, pulling in money, celebrities, politicians, and powerful allies. And it had its own shield, settlements, NDAs, and an army of lawyers ready to bury stories before they ever reached the public eye. And yet, the whispers never fully went away. Tales of wild parties, drug-fueled nights, and exploitation swirled through the industry. Some dismissed them as gossip. Others swore they were true. But if there was one thing everyone agreed on, it was that Sean Combs lived larger than life, in ways most could barely imagine. Publicly, Diddy cultivated the image of a hustler who made it, a mogul who never stopped grinding, a man who beat the odds. But privately, according to lawsuits and whispers, there was another side, one defined by power imbalances, manipulation, and fear. Two realities, one man, and as the 2000s came to a close, the gap between image and reality was growing harder to ignore. By the end of the decade, Sean Combs was wealthier, more famous, and more powerful than ever. But so were the questions surrounding him. How did he stay untouchable? What secrets were buried behind the closed doors of his empire? And as the 2010s began, those questions would grow louder and far more dangerous. By the early 2010s, Sean Combs was no longer just a hip-hop figure. He was a global tycoon. His Sean John clothing line, his Ciroc vodka partnership, his television ventures, all pushed him to the heights of wealth. Forbes listed him among hip-hop's richest, often calling him the industry's first billionaire in the making. To the world, he looked untouchable. He dated models, mingled with politicians, walked red carpets, and positioned himself as a symbol of the American dream. He was Harlem's son, who had conquered the world, the mogul who had turned music into an empire. But beneath the surface, the shadows were multiplying. Throughout the 2010s, lawsuits continued. Former employees alleged harassment. Women accused him of coercion. Associates spoke of intimidation. Most cases ended the same way: a payout, a non-disclosure agreement, and silence. To the outside world, Diddy remained clean. To those closer to the truth, it looked like a fortress of money and influence, buying silence one settlement at a time. But not everyone stayed silent. In backrooms, in interviews that never made air, in anonymous forums, whispers became stories. Stories of parties where power blurred into exploitation. Stories of young artists who felt trapped in his orbit. Stories of women who described nights that began with glamour but ended in fear. Some were dismissed as rumors. Others were buried under the weight of Diddy's empire. And then the world changed. In 2017, the hashtag #MeToo movement erupted. Powerful men across entertainment, politics, and business faced a reckoning. Harvey Weinstein, R. Kelly, Bill Cosby. The spotlight on abuse and exploitation grew hotter than ever. And though Sean Combs was not yet at the center, his name appeared again and again in online conversations, in hushed discussions, in lists of powerful men accused of hiding dark secrets. Behind the scenes, federal investigators were taking notice. Patterns of allegations, financial transactions, testimonies from former insiders. Slowly, a puzzle was forming, a picture of power, control, and alleged trafficking. For years, the pieces remained scattered, but law enforcement was watching, waiting, gathering. Even as whispers grew, Diddy remained in public, throwing parties, producing shows, appearing at award ceremonies. But more lawsuits followed, more settlements, more headlines hinting at darkness beneath the diamond watches and silk suits. His empire was still standing, but the foundation was trembling. For nearly 2 decades, Sean Combs had walked a tightrope between triumph and scandal. But as the 2020s began, the balance shifted. Accusations grew louder. Survivors stepped forward. Federal investigators circled closer. And the fortress of money and power that had protected him for so long was finally beginning to crumble. The man who once seemed untouchable was now standing at the edge of a storm, and when it broke, the entire world would be watching. By the early 2020s, whispers about Sean Combs had turned into shouts. Survivors stepped forward, some breaking NDAs, others risking everything to tell their stories. Media outlets began publishing detailed accounts of exploitation, coercion, and trafficking. The image of Diddy as hip-hop's untouchable mogul was beginning to unravel, not through rumor, but through testimony. In March 2024, federal agents moved. Raids were conducted on properties linked to Combs, from Los Angeles mansions to Miami estates. News helicopters hovered overhead. Cameras captured armed agents entering gates once reserved for celebrity guests. Inside, investigators searched for evidence, documents, electronics, anything that might reveal the truth hidden behind decades of luxury. The raids ignited a media firestorm. Talk shows dissected every detail. Social media exploded. Celebrities distanced themselves. Some defended him, others fell silent. For the first time, it seemed the empire's grip on culture was slipping. The world was no longer asking if Diddy could fall. They were asking when. By late 2024, indictments followed. Federal prosecutors charged Sean Combs with multiple counts, including transporting women across state lines for prostitution, in violation of the Mann Act. The charges carried weight. For decades, men in power had avoided accountability. But now, Combs would face the full force of the justice system. The trial was a spectacle. Prosecutors laid out a case built on survivors' testimony, financial records, and the testimony of former insiders. Defense attorneys fought back fiercely, painting Combs as a victim of opportunists and false narratives. Every day, the courtroom filled with reporters, sketch artists, and spectators eager to see history unfold. The most powerful moments came from the survivors, women who described nights that began with glamour and ended in exploitation. Their words were raw, painful, unforgettable. Each story chipped away at the image Combs had built, the mogul, the billionaire, the untouchable. For many watching, it was no longer about music or fame. It was about power and the damage left in its wake. On a quiet day in 2025, the jury returned. The room fell silent. Sean Combs, jaw clenched, stared straight ahead. The foreperson stood, on the charge of transporting women across state lines for prostitution guilty. Gasps echoed. Reporters scribbled furiously. The gavel struck. After decades of power, privilege, and empire, Sean Diddy Combs was a convicted felon. The verdict sent shockwaves around the world. Fans mourned. Critics claimed justice was finally served. Industry insiders scrambled to distance themselves. The empire that once seemed eternal was now fractured beyond repair. What remains is a question. How will Sean Combs be remembered? As the boy from Harlem who turned ambition into an empire? Or as the mogul who used power to exploit? Perhaps both. Perhaps neither. History has not yet decided. But one truth is certain. The fall of Sean Diddy Combs will echo for decades, not just as a story of one man, but as a symbol of an era where power and fame could no longer silence the truth. The guilty verdict in 2025 rippled across the globe. Some cheered, believing justice had finally pierced the shield of celebrity. Others grieved, unable to reconcile the man who gave them anthems with the crimes for which he was convicted. Social media became a battlefield of emotion. Hashtags trended, documentaries aired, podcasts dissected the trial blow by blow. The story of Sean Diddy Combs wasn't just news. It was history unfolding in real time. In the months after, the empire that had once seemed indestructible began to crumble. Sean John, once a billion-dollar clothing brand, was quietly dismantled. Bad Boy Records, the label that defined an era, became a relic of the past. Partnerships dissolved. Endorsements vanished. Former allies distanced themselves. What took decades to build unraveled in months. But this wasn't just about one man. It was about a culture reckoning with its past. Hip-hop, once a movement of rebellion, had birthed billionaires, but it also birthed unchecked power. As artists and fans reflected, difficult questions surfaced. How much did people know? How much was ignored? And how should a culture honor the art, while acknowledging the harm behind the artist? For the survivors, the verdict was more than a headline. It was validation. For years, they had been silenced, ignored, or dismissed. Now their words had been heard in court and around the world. Some found platforms, writing books, speaking on stages, becoming advocates for others trapped in silence. In their courage, they shifted the narrative. This was no longer just a story of Diddy's fall. It was the story of resilience. Yet, the trial also forced America to confront the price of silence. How many people knew and said nothing? How many industries profited while victims suffered? These were questions that reached far beyond Sean Combs, touching Hollywood, politics, sports, and music. The verdict was not just about one man. It was about an entire system that allowed him to thrive unchecked for decades. So how will Sean Diddy Combs be remembered? For some, he will forever be the soundtrack of the 90s, the man who gave the world bad boy records, the genius who turned ambition into empire. For others, he will be remembered as a cautionary tale, a mogul consumed by power and brought down by his own actions. In truth, his legacy may always be both, brilliance and darkness intertwined. This is the story of Sean Combs, a story of ambition, empire, power, silence, and downfall. But it is also the story of survival, of voices finally heard, of an industry forced to face its shadows. In the end, it reminds us that no empire, no matter how glamorous, no matter how untouchable it may seem, is immune to truth. Thank you for staying with me till the very end of the story here on True Crime Arena. If you found this deep dive insightful, please don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us keep uncovering the darkest true crime stories with the detail and care they deserve. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next case we explore together. Until then, stay curious, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next story.